Hello. Late spring of 2017 was a sad time for the city of New Orleans. That's when sanctimonious former mayor Mitch Landrieu orchestrated the removal of at least three magnificent Confederate monuments that stood for over a century. The first monument removed on May 11, 2017, was a statue of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis said the following, and this is his quote: "I tried all in my power to avert this war. I saw it coming for 12 years. I worked night and day to prevent it, but I could not." That's his quote. A week later, the next monument removed was the equestrian statue of General Pierre Beauregard, located at the entrance to the New Orleans City Park. Now, here's Jefferson Davis that I would just mention, and then a statue of General Beauregard. We're going to talk about the Confederate statue here of General Robert E. Lee up on this long pedestal. The Confederate monument removals were conducted as follows. The police arrived and removed everyone near the monuments. Then the police barricaded a large area around each monument for cranes and other removal equipment. Their work was done mostly in the evening hours. And I want you to keep the following scripture in mind. Proverbs 4:16 said the following: "For they can't sleep unless they have done what is evil. They are robbed of sleep unless they make someone stumble." Afterwards came Landrieu's pompous diatribe with his justification for removing the monuments. One statement stuck out to me, and that was the one in which Landrieu questioned how he could explain to a young African American girl who the person was on top of the pedestal, that's here, in Lee's circle, and why Lee should inspire her. I would tell this imaginary girl Christian General Lee was admired by both the North and the South. Initially, Lee was asked to lead the Northern armies in the War for Southern Independence, but turned it down as it meant that he would fight his native Virginians. And Lee couldn't turn his sword toward his friends and relatives. Mitch Landrieu should tell this young African American girl the following. According to African American Booker T. Washington, this is his quote: "The first white people in America, certainly the first in the South, to exhibit their interest in reaching the Negro and saving his soul through the medium of Sunday school were Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson." President and General Ike Eisenhower admired Lee, and a picture of him is in his office. He said this about Lee: "From deep conviction, I simply say this: a nation of men of Lee's caliber would be unconquerable in spirit and soul. Indeed, to the degree that the present-day American youth will strive to emulate his rare qualities, including his devotion to this land as revealed in his painstaking efforts to help heal the nation's wounds once the bitter struggle was over, we, in our own time of danger in a divided world, will be strengthened and our love of freedom sustained." So this is two great men, Booker T. Washington and Eisenhower, who admired General Lee. And they were a great example for everyone. And there were many more. Lee had no slaves. His wife inherited the family's slaves. During the war, Lee left battle to return home to help free his wife's slaves according to his father-in-law's will. I can assure you that Lee's resume should allay Landrieu's uneasiness about trying to inspire African Americans. Furthermore, I know a lovely African American family in Georgia. They have two daughters, and both are lawyers, and one graduated from Washington and Lee with a law degree. So it did not bother this young lady to earn a law degree with Lee's name on it. Lincoln freed no slaves. His 1861 inaugural address stated he would not interfere with slavery. 2 years later, he wrote the Emancipation Proclamation that freed no slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation stated that he wanted to free slaves in the rebel states, which would be, he thought, the Confederacy. But Lincoln had no authority to free them, and his Emancipation Proclamation failed to mention the slaves he could free in the other states, and for which he did have authority. Also, Lincoln supported the Corwin Amendment, Corwin, that kept slavery into perpetuity. So if you don't know about the Corwin Amendment, you might want to look it up. New Orleans leaders' real motive for removal of the Confederate monuments is revenge for their ancestors being slaves. However, they're wrong to try to punish the South or Confederacy for slavery by removing the monuments. The South inherited slavery. First, African tribal leaders captured other Africans and sold them into slavery. Then the Spanish, British, and Portuguese brought slaves to America. And then later, the northeastern states of New York, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island brought slaves here, and they made a fortune off the slave trade business. The Stars and Stripes flew on slave ships, not any Confederate flag. Massachusetts was the first American colony to legalize slavery. At the end of the 1700s, there were more slaves in New York than in Georgia. And the war was not fought for the purpose of freeing slaves or keeping them. Lincoln had 5 states in the Union that were slave states: Maryland, Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Delaware. There was no reason that Lincoln would fight a war to free slaves when he had slave states in the Union. Makes no sense. In fact, Lincoln accepted West Virginia into the Union as a slave state. The North invaded the South to force it back into the Union, as it was going broke when the South left the Union and was no longer paying tariffs into the Treasury. After New Orleans removed the Confederate monuments, Mayor Landrieu said, "We could now celebrate inclusivity and diversity." This is a lie. The Confederacy celebrated inclusivity and diversity. Look at this picture of Cherokee Americans who were Confederates. I think you can see them here. And there were more. Here are African Americans at a Confederate Union, and they're wearing reunion medals and ribbons. I have a list of thousands of Hispanics who fought for the Confederacy, and here's a few of them right here. This past June, New Orleans erected the below statue that I'm going to show you. It is an afropick with a clenched fist on top that symbolizes Black power. I will say that the fist represents animosity, hatred, and violence toward others. In this picture is current New Orleans Mayor LaToya Contrell raising her fist. I'm going to show you that picture right now. I think you can see it, and I highlighted it in red. And as you see, it's an afropick, and in this picture at the top is the mayor, LaToya Contrell, in blue, and she's raising her fist. Maybe you can see it more clearly. The afropick and at the top with the clenched fist. Mitch, in your justification statement, you claimed that it would be hard to explain to a young African American girl how the Lee statue can inspire her. Can you explain how this afropick monument is inspirational to other young girls? Also, after the Confederate monuments were removed, you stated that New Orleans can now celebrate inclusivity and diversity. Please explain how the afropick with the Black Power fist at the top celebrates inclusivity and diversity for others who are not African American. I thank you for watching. Please feel free to share this with others.